Thanks for taking the time to come sit with us to address these very important pressing issues for our community. And before I get into the meat of all of it, and we do want this to be a very tight, on the fly we emphasise that it's going to be community strategic, which we don't have enough of. We get a lot of community grassroots, community operational, community reactive. We want this meeting to be the first in a series of meetings driven by Black Sox that is community strategic and community futurist. So we'll get into that. So before we go anywhere, I want to just give our host for this evening the opportunity to say a little bit about himself. And first just acknowledge the fact that he set aside and effectively sponsored the space for us this evening. Thank you. A round of applause from the room.
Thank you very much. Welcome to our HQ. Some of you have been here before, some of you are here all the time. And so we really welcome you here. This is a great space for a good conversation. The issues are really right up there for us to address in terms of stop and search, serious knife crime. And for me, at Operation Black Vote, Black Empowerment, to be on the front foot in addressing these issues from a community perspective, but really punching hard in a number of areas. One, to inspire young men and young women to have a strong voice, but also to hold the institutions, the police and the government to account. It starts here. It starts with us understanding the issues and having a plan, having a clear plan on who we are focusing this attention to, and then seeing how we can make serious policy change. I've got a number of hats on here today. First and foremost, from the CEO of Operation Black Vote. 24 years. 24 years is our birthday next month, Lee.
Yeah,
for murder, exactly. Exactly. Lee and myself and Ashok Viswanathan and Rita Patel. Come and join us, come and get a chair. Started this project to ensure that we were powerful in politics to transform our lives. So this debate is part of that process, and we're hoping for a good conversation because for many years in regards to drugs policy in particular, that we've been talked about and not spoken to. We should be driving the debate, and I'm really pleased that Viv and Katrina and Lee and others have said, look, we need our space so we can be a part of this debate. So welcome.
So we've got 9 speakers, including myself. Each individual is going to speak for 5 minutes. This is a briefing session. It's not an opportunity for individuals like myself and Lee Jasper and Simon and others who like to talk a lot to hold you all hostage for the evening. It literally is for us to ventilate some of these issues, make sure that the facts are clear, and then have a conversation about how we're going to move forwards. We'll also share some of what we've already been working on for the last 24 months as far as Black Sox is concerned, in regards to other organisations like Transform, Stopwatch and OBV, a lot longer. I think going forward, and I know you will agree with me, that we're going to take it from here as far as the community is concerned, and in order for that to happen, we must get a grip of the agenda at a strategic level, at a policy level. Experts and specialists like Stopwatch and Transform and so on and so forth will play a critical role in briefing and directing and making sure that what's done makes a lot of sense, it triangulates, but we can't have organisations that have driven the agenda in the past driving the agenda going forward. There are some organisations out there, I'm not going to name them today, who have felt it was okay to come into communities that they don't belong in, right? Draw down the resources for it, use community-based organisations who don't really understand what's going on as black cladding in order for them to leverage the resources out of the community. So it doesn't just happen in the corporate sector, it's happening in the not-for-profit and the public sector. We can't afford it anymore. There's very little money left The local authorities are all putting their hands up now and saying, look, there's nothing we can do. Literally, to be honest, going forward, you're just going to try and hold the line. That's it. So it must be community driven. Black Sox was established 3 years ago, 2016, October the 1st, first day of Black History Month, critically important for us. If we're going to celebrate Black History Month, celebrate it by bringing something into existence that's meaningful. And at the time we made it clear it was on the back of another slew of murders. There's 450 people in the room, and we had 4, maybe 5 hours of hand wringing, Lee.
At least.
And I stood up at the end and said, look, we can't keep doing this going forwards, we have to move forwards. These people aren't going to help us, and you can imagine we're sitting there, the police, the Great Gordon, and the rest going to do it for ourselves. It would have to be asset-based, community development orientated, which means we've got everything that we require in the community in order to move it forwards. Our leadership, for a whole range of reasons, have not delivered in the past. Often it is because they haven't had the support that they required to go forwards, they haven't been trained, they haven't been supported. We can't allow for that to go forwards. We can't allow that to continue to be the case. We have to understand that economics is central to our liberation, to our empowerment. That hasn't been part of the narrative and agenda in the past. In fact, when I ran services for 25 years, all over the country and abroad, France, Sweden, and in the States. And whenever I spoke to young people anywhere, and you said to them, you know, what is it you want? Their response was always, universally, we want money. And we want guidance from the elders. And universally, it's the two things they said they weren't getting. So that's it. Black Sox was brought into existence. Its primary responsibility is not to deliver services, it's to facilitate partnership, support community-based organisations, and what was the last thing? Oh, to work on developing ethical leadership in our communities. So at that meeting with 450 people recorded, you can even see it on YouTube, I stated very clearly, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Too often we bring organisations into existence, you've seen it, you've been there before, it's a firebrand, he, usually a man, speaks very eloquently, people are motivated, inspired, the organisation comes into existence, numbers expand, and before you know it, it crashes and burns. We said that's not how we're going to do it with Black Sox. We're going to take our time, we're going to bring in a core group of individuals, and we're going to incubate them over a period of time. We said 24 months, it's been 36. We're now moving into the next phase, which is this kind of work going forwards that's very strategic and supportive of key organisations that are doing great work on the ground, like Father to Father, Manhood Academy, and many others. So that's where this meeting sits within the process of things. Black Sox has got another 2 meetings like this this year, and it won't be a talk shop and it won't be a long process. We'll have the speakers and we'll talk about what the solutions will be, and we'll come back with what we've done as a consequence of that collectively. Does that make sense? I can't hear you.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good. Everybody that's here this evening is meant to be here. And you saw the brands on the flyer. They're the experts within this area of competence, of these key areas of competence. But in order to deliver on the stuff that we're looking at realising coming out of this, we'll need individuals in this room who are willing to think in a strategic way and operate ethically. So I think I've said enough. I want to start by introducing Mr. Lee Jasper for his 5 minutes. I will monitor everybody to ensure that they stick to it. We'll have the first 4 or 5 speakers, then we'll have an opportunity for us to have a bit of discussion, which will be recorded because we'll put some of this information out for the policy piece that we're working on at the moment, and then we'll go into the final set of individuals, and then we'll conclude on what's going to happen next. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Over to you, Mr. Jasper. Oh, housekeeping. The toilets are on the right, down the stairs, follow your nose, they're on the left. All right?
Not literally, they're just on the left. Well, thanks for that, Dave.
Do you mind standing?
I can stand if you want to.
Yes, please.
I don't do 5 minutes, as you know, guys, so this is going to be a strain for me. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, you know, give me half an hour and I can do 2,500 words, but ask me to write something in 500 words and it's going to take me at least a week. And sometimes my presentations can do that. So I'm just going to move on and hit the ground running. I'm going to assume a level of knowledge because I'm not going to give you a long speech to give you a background to come to a conclusion. So I'm going to assume a level of knowledge that is in the room, and and I'm talking to people that are relatively up to speed. Okay, I think our community is facing the most profound, critical constitution and citizenship challenge that we've ever faced while we've been in this country since we came in really big numbers. I think that you've seen the most expansive growth of institutionalised racism in the provision of services, employment sectors, public and private. That we've seen a growth in institutionalised racism. An example I'll give you, in 1999 when they produced the Macpherson report, stop and search in London was 100,000. By 2012 it was 1.2 million. We were 25% or thereabouts, because you know, give the proper figures, but we're a big chunk of both of those. So we've seen a massive expansion of the level of institutional oppression that is facing our communities. Exclusions from school, mental mishealth diagnosis, unemployment at 55% on average for the African and Caribbean community in London. On average, that means when you go to Peckham it goes to 75, when you go to Dalston it goes to 80, when you get to Cold Harbour Lane you're talking about 90% unemployment in those areas. No community can withstand that, particularly those communities that are bounded by open drug markets that offer an opportunity for multi-million pound industry sitting right on the doorsteps of the very places where we're trying to make our homes and raise our children and bring up our kids. So we've seen this massive expansion. There are more black people in jail now than any other time in British history. The percentage of us going to jail is higher than it's ever been. David Lammy has already covered the fact that the criminal justice system is steeped in racism. It's a racism escalator. Once you put the first foot on that criminal justice escalator, everything escalates up from the next step. So if you get charged, you're more likely to be charged if you're black than white. Let me tell you, they'll go into it. But if you live in a country where you are more likely to be charged for the same offence as white people who receive a caution, then in any other definition, that is an apartheid system of justice. Because it's one rule for somebody and a different rule for somebody else. And let me tell you something, what the research shows, and this is the government's own research, that if you're black in the criminal justice system, even where the white citizen has committed a similar crime and has got more in-depth antecedents, i.e. they have a bigger record of criminal activity, they've been in trouble much more than you, they're still likely to be lesser penalised than you are as a black man or a black woman in the British citizen. Now these are facts, objective, clear facts. And on top of that, we've got a police service, we've got a criminal justice service that discriminates them, we've got a police service whose culture is steeped, its operational policing culture is defined by institutionalised racism. This is not some unconscious activity by unthinking police officers. In my view, this is conscious bias, i.e. racist people in positions of power who are making decisions to discriminate, because you cannot affect the wholesale impact of policing and stop and search as it plays out on our community without having a lot of people who agreed that that's the thing that they want to do. And what we've found is that over the years, 20, 30 years since I've been in the position of fighting police racism, that culture of police racism eats policy for breakfast. They can make all the legislation, all the policy, you can change the law. We abolished the SUS law, we replaced it with PACE. PACE was going to take us to that non-discriminatory land where we didn't get it. We're still being discriminated against in a larger percentage than we were under the SUS legislation. And when you look at policing in our community, black police officers in the Metropolitan Police Service are catching hell. How long have I got that? They're catching hell, all of them. We've got less senior black police officers today than we had 15, 20 years ago. How does that work? So we've got, and the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, at the time, and this speaks to the issue of representation in democracy, we've got more black people in Parliament than we've ever had before. But we've also got the largest racial inequality gap we've ever had at the same time, according to the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So representation in the House is not enough by itself. It's necessary, but not a sufficient condition to get equality. You need to do something else, as well as have elected black politicians. That's what this shows us. Because right now we've got more black people, and we're getting the same sort of discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. Because we've got 5 speakers first, so if you've got questions, take the notes, because we're going to have a little 15-minute pause in between for questions. I'm going to hand over now to Jane Slater from Transform.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I work for Transform Drug Policy Foundation. We're a charity think tank campaigning for the legal control and regulation of the drug market. I also run a campaign called Anyone's Child, which is all about telling the very real human stories of how this policy is failing. Current policy of drugs has been in place for over 50 years and it has had disastrous consequences across the globe. We've spawned an enormous illicit market worth some 320 billion globally every year. This in turn has created violence, fueled corruption, devastated entire nations, criminalised families, and failed in its primary goal, which is eliminating the drug market. Drugs are readily available in every town, city, village across the country. And we currently have the record number of drug deaths ever recorded on record in the UK. The impact of this policy is so clearly felt most by the BAME community and the most vulnerable in our community. I don't need to tell you about that. I know you all know far too feel the experience of that. And the whole policy of drug prohibition is based on xenophobia. And Michelle Alexander in the States has done some brilliant work on this. You know, it is no coincidence that white drugs, alcohol and tobacco are legal. It was drugs that historically, 50 years ago when this policy came into place, that were associated with Hispanic, Afro-Caribbean and Chinese communities that are now illegal and dealt with in the criminal justice system rather than the health system. And due to the endemically racist nature of the criminal justice system, you know, we have seen this outlined by groups such as Stopwatch, the Dave Lamy report. We can see that the consequences of this policy are simply unjust. And so you end up with perverse things like the BAME community being far more likely to get criminalised for drugs than a white person, even though rates of drug use are higher amongst the white community. Well, I'm in no doubt that drug laws are causing harm, but what can we do about it? And I think we need to move the conversation on. First and foremost, I would say that we need to treat drugs within a health remit rather than a criminal justice remit. This would remove one element of the way that the state, the police, the courts and the prison system can oppress people of colour. Then, if we want to do something about reducing the turf wars, child labour, violence, corruption, the criminal aspects associated with the drug trade, we need to get the market out of the hands of criminals and into the hands of doctors, pharmacists, licensed retailers. We're talking about government regulation. We're talking about age restrictions, price controls, taxations, licensing, regulation of vendors, quality control. So this is about really restricting the market, not the free-for-all that we currently have today. You do not see the same level of turf war violence around the tobacco industry as you do around drugs. That is down to the different legal status of the two drugs. And this is fundamentally about finding a policy that puts youth and child protection at its heart. And the thing is this isn't actually pie in the sky. It's starting to happen in the US, Canada. All these issues are actually turning into reality with the legalisation of cannabis. I'm not saying that legalisation and regulation is a panacea. It will not solve racism or other violent aspects of the state. Neither will it solve social inequality, but it will take away a major source of criminal revenue and opportunity. And what is interesting is where the debates are now going in the US. And what we're seeing is the issue of social equity coming at the heart of cannabis legalisation. And so we're looking at things about automatic expungement for cannabis convictions. We're talking about changing the bodies of the regulation system. And we're looking at things like the revenues being made from cannabis, taxation, being re-put into the communities where the major impacts of drug prohibition have been experienced. These are the debates that we need to be having. I have no doubt that cannabis legalisation is coming to the UK, but what we need to do is insist that when this comes to the UK, social equity is at its heart.
There you go. Nice point.
join our lobby on the 25th of July.
Yeah.
You have to get that.
Take meticulous notes. If you're going to come to our Black Sox briefing sessions, you should come with a notepad and pen in order to master your brief, increase your competence so that you can share the information when you go back out into our communities. Too much ignorance out there. People perpetually talking about knife crime as though that is the problem, as opposed to the symptom. Okay, we have Katrina French, Stopwatch.
Good evening everyone, so thank you for putting this event on Black Stocks, OBV for hosting it. I think it's a pertinent event, so pleasure and honour to be here to present. So my name is Katrina French, I'm the Chief Executive of an organisation called Stopwatch. I just want to share a bit about what we do. We've been in existence now for the last 9 years, and we're a research and action organisation focused on fair, effective and accountable policing, specifically around the use of stop and search. So we were formed at the time where Lee quite rightly said we had over 1 million stops and searches. We had the back end of the counter-terrorism laws that saw section 44. We saw the encroachments on all sorts of communities. But at the heart of that, the black community has forever been, I say, oppressed by the PACE law. So we came back into existence and we produce research and reports. At the end of the table, you'll see our 2 most recent reports. I've got a brief in there, Colour of Injustice, Race, Drugs and Law Enforcement, and also on the gangs matrix, and a small flyer that we've recently developed in response to trying to find out whether people are actually on the matrix and trying to support them with legal support to either remove them or look at a more strategic way, which is a legal challenge against the actual system. So that's a bit about what we do. I think this is pertinent because in the last 9 years we've seen a massive reduction in the use of stop and search. Last year, less than 300,000. However, we haven't seen a reduction in racial disparities. So we thought that with the best use of stop and search scheme, which Theresa May brought in about 2014, we would see some progress in terms of racial disparities, but actually it's got worse. So whilst officers now know how better to write their reasonable grounds, I'd say their grounds aren't reasonable still. So we've seen better writing skills in terms of the HMIC checking their records and seeing that they stand up to the test. But actually on the road, we're seeing black males are up to 9 times more likely to be stopped for drugs than their white counterparts, and under a normal PACE stop, which is anything for a prohibited article, up to 8 times more likely. So the numbers are still there, and the impact, let's be clear, hasn't got any better for young black boys, or must I say young black men or black women or anybody that is stopped. I think it's really important because there is a misconception that it is just men. In the last month or so, we've had women in their 40s approaching Stopwatch about being assaulted by the police via stop and search. So there are some areas I think we need to draw attention to, specifically around predictive technology that's coming in. So I don't know if you'll be aware of facial recognition technology. So that's really important because we already know that in the design we're not involved. So we have issues about unconscious or conscious bias in the development of such technology, its implementation, and then also how, not just how it's used, but how it's reviewed. Are we the people that's involved in any of the scrutiny panels or ethics panels? So we have to just kind of put that out from the beginning. We're not involved in the inception or conception. It's probably going to be damaging to us. That comes into play not just because of you walking on the road, but actually by body-worn technology now that police officers have. At present, there is no facial recognition technology behind that, but I would bet that coming forward, it probably will be. So even though you're stopped and you don't have to give your name, address, they've got your face, which I can tell you is a lot harder to change than your name. So highlighting that as an area. We're seeing data extraction, so being stopped and then your mobile phone being asked to go into your mobile phone, even though there are no grounds to go into your mobile phone. And I think it's really right what Viv says is, whilst people get quite frustrated, we keep having the same conversation, I keep saying we'll have that conversation until the issue has been addressed. And most people are quite naive, maybe ignorant or misinformed, ill-informed about actually what the police can do at that time. So going into your mobile phone, demanding your mobile phone. Fingerprint scanners, if the police believe that they can't verify your identity, even though in a stop and search you don't have to give it, we're going to take a fingerprint of you. And that's really pertinent for, let's just be clear, black and brown people, because if you've got issues with your immigration status, boom, you're connected right there. So this is just a normal stop and search encounter that out of nowhere now, you could be getting the Home Office called and involved. We've also got the IME catchers, which is where you're driving and the cell towers on your mobile phone. So this is usually used against protesters, but also used in joint enterprise. So being able to say you're in a specific place at a specific time. How many minutes, Chair?
you've got 2.
Okay, and then just touching on kind of more, that's the policing side of stuff, and I think it's important for us to get to grips with the technology, how it's moving, how, to be honest, most of us in this room aren't really on par or understanding the impact it's going to have, but also the increase of use of Section 60 stops. So we saw this massively reduced after the Julia Roberts case, which went to the Court of Appeal, I believe. It might have gone higher, but it was dismissed and it wasn't upheld. But it had an impact because the police started to reduce the use of Section 60 because they were quite scared the power would be taken away. So rather than be taken away, we'll lessen it so it doesn't seem as though it's as infringing. With the knife crime, serious youth violence, I don't even say youth, serious violence, because it's not just pick me them that's killing people, it's a lot of adults as well, is now we're seeing a rise in Section 60s, and that means that anybody who fits the description or the demographic, which is their perception of who is doing the knife crime, violent crime, is going to be stopped. So that's where we catch now this big dragnet of people who might have a smaller bit amount of cannabis going to check their brethren, now being stopped under a Section 60 pay stop, found small amount of cannabis criminalised straight away under that. Also, smell of cannabis being used for grounds alone. You can't put the smell of anything and bring it to court, but yet on the roadside it's being held to this standard that gives the police reasonable grounds. They say, oh, your eyes look red as well. Well, that's a perception as well. And then finally, I think we should focus also on the impact for under 18s and the trauma. So one of the things Stopwatch is looking to develop, and it came to me this morning in the shower, is called RAW, and it stands for Rights and Wellbeing, because we need to not just look at rights, we need to look at the holistic approach about the trauma that young people, children are having to go through just through their daily activities and through state interference. So we'd really be looking for partners to co-develop that package so it is fit for purpose and bespoke for our communities.
Beautiful.
And I think that's my chair.
Beautiful. Nice. Content full. It's all been recorded by HMP TV. We'll give them a round of applause for again sponsoring this event. The last Black Stocks event of the year will be on technology, because that's a big one. Those algorithms and so on and so forth. And we really have to apply our minds to these areas that we haven't traditionally been directly involved in. I mean, there are many black people in the tech industry, but they're invisible. It's one of the reasons why we launched last year Young Black Business Awards, which are all about tech, making sure that our millennials, 18 to 30-year-olds specifically, are in the driving seat of the fourth industrial revolution. And particularly as it relates to how these platforms and other strands of the state are using this technology and these algorithms to control us, to manipulate us going forward. So I'm really glad that that point was touched on specifically. And this predictive policing, being able to criminalize a young person before, in some instances, they've even learned how to say their name. So where social care, social services and all of these elements come in, which is another very specific event that we'll be focusing on. Too big to run in this session specifically. Last speaker is Rosalind Daisy, psychologist, therapist, CAMS. Round of applause, please.
Good evening, everyone. I had prepared something, and then I was told I only had 5 minutes. So what I prepared is completely different to this, what I'm going to talk about. So really, all I want to talk about is the mental health of our children and young people. It has increased over years, and that is a natural increase. And that usually happens depending on what's going on in someone's environment. So it could be within their family, their community, and whatever's going on in politics affects our children as well. Our children are very bright. They watch the news, they listen to their parents, they hear everything that's going on, and if they are affected by it. So there are different stages of development where our children can be more susceptible to mental health issues. From 0 to 5 years of age, that's a crucial time, and that's a crucial time where both parents need to be involved in the development of those children to get them through to the developmental milestones. Now, if, for example, there's only a mother raising the baby, then the father's not there to support that mother, and then when the child has to separate from the mother, that person isn't there to help with that process. So when that child then goes to nursery and school, they find it difficult to separate and go into school or nursery, so they can't settle. Also, the mother might have health issues, might have antenatal depression, other health issues, and not be fully available to that child, so not able to support that child emotionally. So that's where family breakdowns is crucial, and fathers' roles are important in those early stages. Then we have the next stage of development, usually between 11 and 8 and 12 years of age, and that's a time of puberty when children are changing. They're not only changing physically and emotionally, they're changing schools. They're going in from primary to secondary schools. So there's a lot of change going on for that group of children, and their mental health is affected by that. So if you have parents that are not tuned into their children and they're going through physical changes, for example, girls developing breasts, menstruation, boys, masturbation and things like that, if their parents are not on the ball to talk to their children about that, then there's problems. We get a lot of referrals in our service of children that are coming with these normal problems. And so many times I've got to talk to parents and say, it's your job to talk to your children about this, not mine. Fathers look at me in disgust, like, how can you talk to me about this stuff? Because it's your job to talk to your son about this, not mine. But parents don't, either they're not comfortable doing it, they don't know how to do it, or they just think it happens naturally. The crucial stage of development is the 11 to 18, 19-year-olds. That's transition from adolescence into adulthood. These group of young people have to negotiate several things. Pressures of exams, anxiety, feelings of not being good enough. They have uncertainty about the future. I work with many young people that are terrified of not getting a job, not being able to put a roof over their own heads, not being able to live independently. Family relationship issues, the confusion between and the pull between remaining a child and becoming an adult. Some parents don't know how to help their children in that transition. I work with a lot of looked after children in that age range who are terrified because their social workers have told them, we're going to put you in your own flat. They don't know how to budget, they don't have any life skills, and they're absolutely terrified of that prospect.
1 million.
Relationships, peer pressure, body image, various things that they have to negotiate. What is a child young person's experience of living with violence in our communities? It affects everybody. Referrals I see, children can't walk from their home to school for fear. They're just in constant fear, to the extent that they refuse to go to school altogether. Fear of being in public on their own, having to be constantly hyper-vigilant to everything going on around them. Our children know everything that's going on. They know who stabbed who did this, who did whatever. They are a source of information, so they can't get away from it. Example, my 12-year-old son coming home from school with his friend. An older boy approached them and asked for the time. My son, being a bit more streetwise, didn't take out his phone. His friend took out his phone, told the boy the time. Then my son and the boy separated to go their own ways. The next day, later on that evening, my son's friend contacted him and said he was robbed of his phone. So it's affecting every child, just going along their normal daily business.
Thank you. That's the first set of short briefings. So I want to open the floor for some feedback. You can make short comments. It's all being recorded. It will all feed into the stuff that we're producing. And you can also ask questions of the specialists here in the room. And there are, many of you in here are specialists in your own area, so feel free to contribute in that regard as well. So I'll open the floor. Show me your hand, and then we'll take a comment or a question. Don't be shy.
You've got such a tight grip on the room, they can't even raise their hand.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So the leg come up.
That's right.
I guess what we're looking for from Black Sox and Operation Blackbird is clear solutions, plan of action that we can take to government, that we can take to our communities. You've just heard what the panelists have said, and it's pretty depressing. But we're here because we're not going anywhere. We're not giving up. But we want your input. We want your experience, so we can feed it into a bigger grand plan. Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Stefan. I'm here in my personal capacity, but I do work for the Prince's Trust. on the education programs. So I am actually looking out for organisations who work specifically with young black men with a view to kind of bringing them into the trust where possible. A question I've thought about and discussed with friends is where should our resources be focused on our efforts? So we speak a lot about the institutionally racist system, but when you think about it, what can we really do with the system? We can't create our own justice system. So my question is, and my thoughts are, should we be trying to put pressure on systems and get them to change with systems? So that's just a question to the room. It'll be interesting to hear some thoughts on that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, in response to that, so I think that's something that Stopwatch, being research and action, has attempted to do and done to some great success over the last couple of years. And it's in the last year I've become the CEO, so we've kind of had a review of what we wanted to do going forward. And I've had that same kind of tension of how much time is spent trying to influence a system or people's attitudes and beliefs without any real outcome, and then how much time we spend with actually community building. So there are some initiatives that Stopwatch is developing around independent observer schemes. So our thing is that if a stop and search is going to happen, we want it to be a safe encounter. And I say that the young person will feel probably under siege that they're at war. So the thing is to some extent there is a war going on. It's not that we that started, but it's happening to us. And then you have to, in that moment, and I work alongside Dr. Angela Herbert on the Violent Crime Prevention Board. We're looking at comply and complain. So you comply and then you complain. And I keep saying this is where we fall, I think, a bit short, is we have a lot of the kind of damage done to us, but we're not at the same time holding the account bit. Yeah. We're just in the kitchen table having a whinge, and that's right, and having a van. But actually there needs to, and that's why I think some of the organisations have a role to take the emotion out of it, because it's really draining for the person who's gone through the thing to then fight the system. So that's why I think places like Stopwatch and other Manhood Academy and all these other places, Cheryl Phoenix isn't here, but the Black Child Agenda, where you have the resources to then take on board what the community cannot do, because of capacity, but also just energy and draining. So I think exactly that. I think we need to identify policy organisations that are going to come with the evidence and say, boom, this is happening, but at the same time build the capacity in the community to navigate society much more safely than we are at the minute. That's my perspective.
Thank you.
My name is Annelie. I'm a housing professional, but I also have done a lot of work with young people. I set up a youth club in Brixton a couple of years ago, quite a few years ago.
More than a couple. You mean a decade?
Okay. Don't give away my age. But I just wanted to pick up on what Lee was talking about, the prison system. And I wasn't even aware, but I heard on the radio a while ago that there's no black people on the probation board. And there's over 200 people on the probation board, close to 300 people on the probation board. So, you know, in response to your question, you know, what needs to be done? You need to have fair representation in places where things matters, because if you have no representation, the largest prison population we know are black. We know that, that's a fact. But there's no representation on the probation board, which is just ludicrous. You know, I almost fell off my chair when I heard this. So for me, I would say it's a combination of what you're asking. There has to be representation across the board of what you're trying to change, and young people have to be empowered to get into those places. I think when I started Brixton Road Youth Centre, for me it was all about challenging the stereotype of young people living and growing up in SW9. Most young people are ordinary young people, but are heavily stigmatised by the gang culture, teenage pregnancy culture, whatever it is, you know. So challenging that stereotype. Young people are just ordinary young people, however, are being so misrepresented by you know, their ethnic belonging. So yeah.
I'm a therapist. Some people understand I'm a therapist by trade.